Well, maybe we should start with that. Any observations of Austin since you've kind of like boots from the ground, the journalist perspective? What's it like there?
I think my first thought on that is like the geography that we got so much of from Caro in the beginning of the book, and just like how hot and dry and like fickle the weather can be here. And it's and like even Austin is in like it's not all the way out into hill country where all these farmers had these terrible problems. Um, but even here it's hot and sweaty.
Any observations about like the architecture or the layout of the town itself? Is it's like we're way below before a lot of the development that's there currently, but you can kind of still get a sense of that old, like you said, you were at the Driscoll,
Yeah,
like that downtown core.
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I was in Kansas City first, and that's another city that I felt like had this like early American sort of Western like centralizing power, right? So it's like these are like these agricultural centers that are like the hub for hundreds and hundreds of miles of, ag land, just because America is so big. And yeah, Austin feels like that. Kansas City feels like that. Um, and they're towns that you feel had, relatively massive amounts of wealth, around the turn of the century. And yeah, the brick architecture, the museums, yeah, you can feel it.
Very cool. All right, so we were just picking up with like Marcus giving us a sense that he's calling in from office. Thanks, Trey, for letting us know. So glad you're here. And then spinning out now that we've got LBJ here. So I mean, we've been at this for a minute. Anything we want to pick up from before that's been developed into a strand that's firmer and has more vines to it and open up into this session? Things that are very exciting.
Yeah, I'll then all right, so in the beginning of the last meeting, like my whole reaction from part two was that I had felt like just disgusted at LBJ as a person and his tactics, his outlook, the way he treated other people. And I think in this section, it's he's starting to feel more like a complicated person. It's not just like, he's obviously not like a purely evil person, but in part two, he's like, you know, his nature starts to become clear of like how he operates. But now in this section, as he's like getting closer and closer to real power, and we're starting to see like how he puts it into effect and how effective he is at doing it. Um, I think we're starting to get a glimpse of, the whole picture of this man, and I think the one incident that really stuck out for me in this section was they are at the sorry, it's works in, or what's the acronym?
Could you repeat it? You glitched for just 1 second.
Oh, sorry. When he's at the youth work administrator, what's
Mhm.
is that the right the name of
AYR.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have to like get these like 3,000 kids signed up by Monday. And they're like, there's no way, like, it's the weekend, no one's gonna answer their phone. He's like, just go out and go knock on the doors and do it. And they go and nearly like get it all done. And, just this ability of him to, no task seems insurmountable. And he can get his goons to go do it or um but yeah, I mean like he wanted those kids to get to work and he got them to work. And yeah, it's just incredibly impressive.
John.
I was struck by the in getting back to maybe something that was related to your disgust, Marcus, but just his lack of ideological commitment to one side or the other, how he would curry favor with um, conservative and liberal politicians. He wasn't uh, a populist. It makes me wonder. He seemingly wants power for his own sake, but power, it doesn't make sense. So one reaches for an alternative explanation. Like he wanted power because he was lonely. He wanted power because somehow that would fulfill like an unmet need for being loved or something like that. Like a psychological explanation. It's very strange to me, the idea that he just wanted power and he didn't have an idea of what will he do with that power when he gets that power.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I think he wanted to be seen to have power. He didn't really care a lot uh, what it's used for. It does, it seems. Um, but he wants everyone to know that he's the person they have to go through or go to. Uh, and of course, he's to do that at that stage of his life. He has to have very good antennas for who it is he has to go to move up the next rung. You know, he's still very much not an independent actor. He has to uh, scratch the right backs and also have the right lucky events fall in place for him. You know, he's an opportunist, but opportunities also arose that he didn't really make, but he certainly knew how to jump on them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say I don't know if we can definitively say like he has no ideological commitments. He just doesn't evidence them by being so kind of fluid, right? Like um I mean the only thing you can say for sure is that he's always trying to speak to his audience and get them to like him by kind of talking about political matters in the same vein that they do. So it's possible that's a sign that there isn't anything underneath, but it also could be that maybe he does sympathize with one side more than the other, but he's just covering it up in his pursuit of power. Um, and on the PowerPoint, I mean, yeah, I find it hard to understand how somebody that like, especially at that age, could be so kind of cynical and opportunistic. But I mean, obviously, plenty of people are throughout history, right, who do seek power for its own sake. So it's not like I wouldn't consider it that like that he's that singular of a figure in that respect. In terms of a lot of people who, achieved kind of great power politically or in other realms.
Yeah. I wanted to make just a couple little observations about this, just given what we're hearing, and also maybe just to ground in some of the things reading this that have happened in the last month or so that feel like I can't help but have them interpret or sort of lean on my interpretations, and maybe we can suss it out a little. The the question of power for its own sake, like we're reading this in a moment that's like hyper ideological in its theories of power, right? Like high polarization. We assume that the animating motivation for political actors in our moment is about a kind of purification of motivation, right? Are you truly, truly a real whatever? Are you a rhino? Are you like, a lib? Like all of that. And so that landscape of purification does not seem to be in operation here up front in Caro's story of LBJ's power. And so it was interesting to see, like, we know that civil rights legislation is coming, et cetera. It's interesting to watch this figure have such an non-ideological relationship to power. And so I wanted to kind of think about how perhaps we in the present make assumptions about the causal direction of becoming a good fighter. And actually, there's probably like tons and tons of extremely good knife fighters who are like middle of the road or uncommitted or mercenary in their capacities, but the drive to develop that stuff is just kind of free floating, and like you'll sign up for what you sign up for to get to practice that craft. So I just kind of thought that might be useful to tease apart since, I mean, we're all grown-ups, we've probably all encountered people who have these talents, but don't seem to be beholden to anything. I don't know what to do with that. The other piece I thought might be useful to talk about, so that's, does ideology have to deal with power, or is power its own thing? Is this bit about, um, you know, chaining to, we'll wait on a few of those. Maybe if power for its own sake, to come back to, I think, John, you were saying like the desire to fill in a motivation, like that little beat of loneliness that keeps coming back as flirting with a psychoanalytic explanation. Like I don't know if you need an explanation. Maybe you're just allowed to enjoy like Michael Bay films, like just watch, you know, things go together and explode. Like Transformers are fun, right? So do we need that? Is that over the line? Is it like a vacuum waiting for an explanation? I just thought it might be useful to keep an eye on that. Like, do operators need motives other than that? And then, okay, maybe I'll cheat, add one more. If you're not an independent man, you have to move through uh, elevation, which means other people have to know your name, right? And know you're going to channel resource, and you have to know who you ask the resource for. I don't know if there's a way yet to become an independent man on that strategy. That seems incredibly locked into the flows of resources and favors, and I don't see how you get out of that trap. And so just to bring back the earlier questions of traps and escapes in the first couple sections, like it's not clear to me that this isn't that if I were just reading this as a novel, boy, that seems like a way to be somebody's man forever, in the middle, compressed up and down, no matter which way you move. So I'll just flag those. Other thoughts?
I think sort of the background level of scarcity and destitution that exists is very different to today. I mean, a lot of the people that LBJ was acting on behalf of or getting jobs for uh, had very slim opportunities, and often were quite destitute even with the jobs. There's so many descriptions of people living together in hotel rooms and whatnot, and that probably wouldn't have seemed so odd to them today. I mean, to them at the time, but it's certainly a kind of thin rule that really doesn't exist so much today in the same way.
The politics of the belly, as it were, right? Leaves
Yeah,
you
I mean,
open to
we,
really,
we
yeah,
yeah,
go
we
ahead.
can afford to be ideological. We can afford to be ideological now. Uh, right there, they were trying to get their bread buttered, so to speak, or just their bread, period.
JR, John W.
Yeah, I mean that point seems to feed into sort of what drives LBJ. He has, I don't know, I was just reading about what he does. He seems to have this 99.99 percentile drive of like he will just work 20-hour days, 7 days a week for decades. Um, and yeah, I think to some degree that is connected to his own poverty, his own like original like desperation in his youth, and what he saw around him of everyone sort of like being in that position.
Yeah, Massimo.
Yeah, along the lines of ideology, yeah, I think that was his work ethic is definitely very surprising, right? His work at NYA, and I can only imagine a public, you know, um, com or I guess a government entity like that being run today by someone like that. It's incredible, right? Like in some sort of fashion, right? We always think everything's sluggish and it takes a long time, but here he is just being the top in the nation at such a young age. But the ideology side of it too is it reminded me almost like of that like Silicon Valley ethic of a startup, right? Like he has these he has these followers that work just as hard as he does, and I mean, yeah, I'd say, and they just it's just I guess it's just an ideology, and I don't know how it all comes together, but with that personality and that aspect of it, but it is that's what I was kind of thinking about from a modern perspective.
Nudge.
I love the Silicon Valley suggestion, actually. That's yeah, because that is something that startups will do in Silicon Valley is they will get started and then they will look for a business. Look for a business model, or they will pivot. They will start out doing one thing and then they will do another thing, like like Twitter starting out as I think like a podcast app and then turning into Twitter or something like that.
Yeah, John.
That a little bit feeds into the thing that I found most striking in this section. I did sort of piecing together as I read through. Um, and that is that I think LBJ is a cult leader. Like his personality and the way that he treats the people under him is very much like there's that love bombing aspect of like, there's a section where he talks about how like mean and terrible he is and how he puts everyone down and like singles them out and makes them feel like absolute shit. And then every once in a while he's like goes in there and is like, you know, tells how good a job they did and like everyone like, the character was like, yeah, I was his totally willing slave. And like how he gets people to be like, but he's the chief, and like you would do anything for the chief. And it's like this is a cult leader, like straight up. But like his cult is not about like all of you are my wives or like let's all like believe these creepy things. It's about we're go I work 20-hour days. You all are now going to work 20-hour days with me. And he can get people to like do insane stuff this way.
Okay, so we have like a Silicon Valley grind, cult leader negging skills. Like there's a lot on the table, John.
Yeah, I agree with JR. It is like a cult leader and it's paying off. I mean, we're seeing to answer or to respond to Erica's first question too, what we saw in Escape with him dealing with the White Stars. I mean, that's just gone on and on. He's picked up several of them to join the cult. We saw this is a huge part with all the things that happened in it, but the work that he did in DC, putting the people in all the different agencies with jobs, even if they were shit jobs, they were still jobs, and then pulling them back to all work for him in Texas on the National Youth Administration. This is genius. Now, it looks like genius reading about it all over 160 pages, but it's a great story that he's he's having continued success at doing things in this insane cult-like way he's doing it. While I've got the floor, I just will say I really enjoyed the little mini chapters on Lady Bird and Sam Rayburn. I know nothing about either of them, and it was so great to read about them. But thank you, JR, for the concept of LBJ as cult leader. Over.
John, do you want to say anything actually while you've got that floor to just we can come back to it, but if there's something you feel like you want to put into the pot, we're tracking it.
I'm my only thing I said, but I'll repeat that I think we're just going to keep seeing it. He's going to do this over and over again and have more and more complex networks that he keeps drawing on. Uh, I don't. I work for the executive branch of the federal government. I don't know if y'all remember that. I'm in the Foreign Service. So for me, this is particularly fascinating to see and try to track what today's uh, executive branch leaders are doing. Um, I know we haven't got LBJ that high yet, but we all see it coming, of course. So yeah, I'm constantly trying to see what of this is still going on today and what version. So it's very interesting. By the way, I don't practice that myself. I'm not a cult leader in my little part, as far as you guys know. Over. Thank you.
All.
Yeah, I think I mean, the hours like that he's working, I mean, clearly he's, it sounds like most of Congress, he was in there before and after everybody. It's quite a bit. But at the same time, I mean, I think just in context, like all these people coming off of the farm, they would have been working 7 days a week, dusk till dawn till after dusk. Even like, I think most like manufacturing jobs back then were probably 6 days a week, kind of average was probably for a lot of people like 50, 60 hours a week. So he's clearly like hardworking and beyond all these other people in politics. But it's not maybe quite as extreme as it it seems like in a context of like everybody works 40-hour weeks or something. I think on um oh sorry, am I still yeah, still got me. Yeah, and then I was just really struck by his like kind of preternatural ability to kind of go into the federal government at that young age and like be so effective so quickly. Being the person whose congressional district was like the most effective at implementing all of those farm programs and quicker and with greater coverage than like anywhere else in the country. And it's and there keep being things like that over and over again. And then even on the that he was able to figure out the machinery, and it's like, well, of course this guy, I mean, he's doing that at 22, of course he's going to become like this extremely effective Senate majority leader and president who can twist everything to his will. It's really quite remarkable, like almost this I mean, both the hard work but almost kind of like this genius at figuring out how to make a bureaucracy to work at that level when he's so young and has kind of no background aside from like a little familiarity with state politics back in Texas. So I found that like really impressive, obviously mixed with all of his kind of dislikable personal characteristics, but it's kind of pretty amazing. Or even on like the political maneuvering side. I mean, Cairo doesn't seem to dispute it. There probably were a lot of sources for it that he's the one who gets all the congressmen in, comes up with the idea and then organizes all the congressmen in Texas to be able to like avoid John Nance Garner from taking away their ability to kind of hand out spoils in all of these counties. It's just kind of crazy. I didn't realize at that age, like LBJ was kind of like this, kind of like raw political talent on the national stage, even in a way.
Massimo.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I think something that it made clear to me was how much low hanging fruit there is in a situation like that, where uh, there are opportunities if you act, and there's sort of an organizational structure and a sort of set of unspoken rules and practices that everyone goes along with. And if someone can get in there and twist it to their will, they can actually almost take over, an informal system and move it in directions they want. So it's sort of all the mechanics are there, but if often no one is driving. And LBJ was very good at figuring out where steering wheels were. He certainly loved driving around a fancy car too. Apparently, that was an important thing for him to do at whatever stage.
that was masterful, David. Massimo.
That's great. So on the lines of LBJ as a cult leader and tech bro, I was gonna say, failure is an interesting one from Little Congress, right? So he controls Little Congress, he has his little cult there, and then as soon as he's found out that he's stuffing the ballots and they're not legit, and he loses, like he's just gone. Like there's nothing else. Now maybe it's because he's busy with other things, but just that aspect of failure is interesting where, maybe a cult leader would be like, oh, the aliens are coming, and then they don't come, and they're like, oh, well, tomorrow there's a new date, right? Let's but in this instance, it's like more of the tech bro character where it's like I'm gonna fail, but the ends justify the means. I'm here for something greater than that, and we'll just keep going. Obviously, there's an emotional side to LBJ in that sense, and it kind of, I think Caro kind of showed that in the Little Congress, as he was kind of back in the shadows and not really wanting, they were kind of trying to debate him and say things, and he wouldn't respond in that sense of it. But that was interesting. And then one other thing, when the mention of Rayburn in that chapter, there was a little bit of when he went back to school, when he went to law school, for like those couple months, and there was an interesting part there, and I don't know what to really think about, but it's there was this passage where it says he was willing to learn specific rules of law, but he was unwilling, defiantly, determinedly unwilling to learn the historical or philosophical reasonings behind them. Lyndon never recited once in class. And maybe I skipped that when he was in college from the last chapters, or the last sections, but like, you know, here we are kind of trying to understand him and decipher him. And obviously, Caro is doing a wonderful job, but like, it doesn't seem to be LBJ's like concern in some certain way. So just thought that was kind of interesting to maybe show his character a little bit more.
Marcus, did you want to take a pause? I know your hand was up, so I totally makes sense if you're away, but I just didn't want to leave that out. Maybe hold that space. Let us know if you want to come back to it. So we've got like the sort of now LBJ is tech bro, cult leader, allocator also, like some form here of like the ability to kind of allocate, and then this kind of recurrent problem of reputation. So failure says you can burn it, right? Like you can leave the situation, you don't have to worry about the reputational stakes so much. But on the other hand, like a lot of getting things done is often about having to put your name out there. So he does this other weird little thing where he's like, from the secretary of from the desk of my boss, right? Where he's using all of these little openings it's a beautiful kind of exploit, right? In the kind of machinery of correspondence to append his name above where the secretarial position is usually like below, and invert that order constantly to take a little rider or a little bit of just a little take off of every transaction. So in this sense too, he seemed to have like a real sense of how like the toll road operations of accumulating reputation, renown, and social capital seem to move. I was really struck by that. I don't know if we got that some foreshadowing of that capacity earlier in the books, but I couldn't recall. David, did you want to say something? Sorry, you had that.
No, I was
Okay.
just
All right.
listening. I mean, I think what you're saying is very true. That he had these antennas up all the time, and I guess it would be impossible for a biographer like Caro to do this. But I think, for the most part, but we're told about things that Johnson did and how he organized his office. It would be wonderful to know what he was noticing in other offices that led him to, what was he recognizing? What were his antennas picking up about uh, the world he was observing? But he was certainly trying to create a special kind of operation for himself that would bubble him up to the top of whatever situation he was trying to rise in. Um, so it would be good to have his notes, Johnson's notes about the world he was observing.
Oh, wouldn't it just? John.
Yeah, on that note, I suspect that he kept his notes in his head. Um, the thing, a mystery that makes not that much, the thing that doesn't make sense to me that I'm trying to figure out is there's these like two basic modes of thinking. One is the like you're focused on the task and you're like getting the thing done and you're making it happen. And the other is this sort of like more diffuse, like reflective, like see what comes up. And like he had to be doing a lot of the reflective stuff in order to be able to like come up with these ideas of like, oh, here's the little Congress that nobody cares about. I can turn this into my little fiefdom to like project and show my power and like make actual like real Congress people come to me for like opinions about bills. Well, I'm just a secretary, right? And like, how do you do that? How do you come up with that unless you like spend some time like just really like reflecting and thinking? And yet at the same time, he is working all the time. He's not sleeping much, which is another thing that you should do to be able to reflect. And I'm like, where does he have time to do this in everything that he's doing? Like it must be just doing this while he's behind the wheel, going from place to place because he does go around to different offices. This is the thing that boggles my mind. It's like, oh yeah, it's time to both be a 99th percentile doer and a 99th percentile like reflector.
On the tech bro, I mean, this is like the ultimate like bias to action meets like ruminator, it's like, no, you can be a thinker and a doer, Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like tech executive mode or something like that, though they don't write about it that way, because he's navigating the bureaucracy at the same time. We do get
Yeah,
these little
maybe if
flashes. Oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, maybe if you were born like, 100 years later, his aspiration would have been to be a billionaire, and not to be president.
Hmm. That's a good question. And we do get these tiny little bits, right, that says when he's thinking, don't interrupt him. But it's like in the car ride or some like space. And it's probably like Texas is a big state. So one of the funny things about reading the narrative, right, is that there's all this condensed action, but there can't be that many human beings who actually want to talk to you on a daily basis in Texas at this stage. Like these are, you're serving towns of a couple hundred people sometimes. So I wonder if there's something about the geography that like bakes in time to be a reflective human being if you want it. I don't know. I was also wondering if you thought about, so just to push another piece from the present, we've got the operator who is amassing power, and there's some other like examples kicking around in the present worth paying attention to, right? Like we just went through like Mamdani's summer here in New York, which like he's running the playbook of a lot of these sorts of elements that have been left behind as a tradition of doing populist power. And so I just couldn't help but think about I think I can forget who, like, was it maybe David, did you raise it, or John? John, you raised it. Who's doing this well today, right? Who knows how to move like this and knows some of these playbooks? And do you see them repeating in the present? So I'll just flag the Mamdani piece, right? Who I'm sure he certainly knows his FDR history because it's a link to New York, but there's a lot going on here that's similar. And the other piece is those dams, getting energy systems built when you don't quite have permission to do it in the context of the US. I couldn't help but think about the emergence of politics on the left and right about data centers and energy transitions. And so I just wondered if there's anything that's starting to emerge here that you were hearing that kind of double, I don't know, stereoscopic historical time too. Like, are there clues about the moves we're gonna see or that people are operating with respect to populist strategies for doing power in order to get industrial transformations done that you need to have state buy-in to accomplish? Because it's like poking through all over.
Hey,
I think maybe a difference between today and then is that there's so many institutional barriers that have been built that are going to make building data centers or anything like that more difficult. Uh, it sounds like most of the difficulties in LBJ's time were financial and getting the money together, especially if some of it had to come from the feds. Um, Now there are so many regional and local uh, land development rules, and I'm an elected official in my local government, and we deal with those things on our very small basis regularly. And of course, those things developed over time in response to some of the uh, liberties we'll say that people like dam developers use. Um, so the environment today may be very different. Um, One person I thought of who might be a comparable, uh, he's on the way out now, but Mitch McConnell, I think, is someone who knew how to find the very nearly hidden levers and ropes of power to get things done in the Senate. And I don't know much about his early life, but I expect that there's not an entirely different story about his rise in Kentucky.
Marcus, did you want to say something?
yeah, sorry I hopped off. I actually had to go grab some equipment from a coworker because I think I am working on a data center here, like 4 hours out east of or west of Austin. Um, so yeah, I'm close to that sort of politics. I worked on solar farms. I've been working on them for many years, and they have a similar sort of like um I don't know what's the right word, like just like an animosity towards them. In the book here we get so the the firm like buys out or like gets these like farms foreclosed upon, and like that becomes like a bigger issue, right? So even like these data centers, solar farms, and these dams are all like they you would imagine they'd only be like very, very local issues. They really only touch like, a small um um geographical footprint, but there becomes something in like the mind of the people that they're unfair, that they're destructive, and you get this like, you get these like big groups of people who have never, interacted with, a data center, and then have like strong political opinions on it. And I don't know, I think from what we read here, that's evergreen. That people can get worked up on an issue that's not like super super relevant to them.
John or not Nudge? I guess I thought you seemed like you wanted to say something, so I didn't want to pass that over.
Sorry, no, I'm just thinking about the local versus uh, uh, national issues. Um, and I will say in my where thinking about it's evergreen, right? The kind of the populist versus local, populist versus business interests question. It feels like something that um, it's almost as if we are returning to something more like the early 20th century um, time when Republicans are for tariffs and there is a populist versus um, a kind of a populist, very strong populist versus business interests uh, orientation, populist versus business interests, populist versus a kind of a double-sided. I don't know. I think that there's at one time the weirdness of the 20th century, early 20th century situation was that you had liberals, you had conservatives, all within the Democratic Party, right? And someone like LBJ could thrive because he was willing to work with everybody, regardless of their ideological orientation. So today in politics, I mean, maybe Mitch McConnell is an example. I think of people like Bill Clinton. Um, I think of elements in the Democratic Party who are sort of trying to say, like, oh, we'll work with everybody. But the Democratic Party now seems so ideologically bound, and the people who vote, the Democratic voters, really distrust anything but ideological authenticity. So it's very hard to have a like a what someone like Matt Iglesias calls a popularist message. Just it's really hard to get that to fly because I think most people are distrustful of that. They see it as a kind of lying. Whereas I guess in LBJ's time, some people were distrustful of him, but a lot of people just wanted to win.
I mean, in a way, there's almost like a cross pressure. Like, if you have to be responsible to an authenticity on messaging ideologically, it's really hard to develop as an operator because operators are using machineries that are, neutral. They're already built, whether it's bureaucratic or, the system of correspondence or the media, et cetera, et cetera. And so LBJ's sort of fluency with them seems to keep letting him pop over to an alternative one and then use those conversion points between systems as a site of accumulating some capital that he can then put a little patronage network on top of too, right? So you got a little bit of the Prince which Chris Rufo sometimes talks about the Republican Party this way, right? It's like it's a prince structure, right now. And so that's another strategy you can use, but you can feel that little bit of Machiavelli, trying to laminate itself to the operational politics of being good with instrumentation of power. And I don't think we see something like that today quite yet, but maybe we will. Feels a little like looking into the future. The other thing I wanted to just circle back to was if these things are recurrent and perennial, then it would seem like the playbooks have been written already. So does this picture of how LBJ moves feel totally familiar and like, oh, we already know all of this. We've metabolized it as a way to do politics and invention, or does it feel unprecedented and surprising? And if so, like, why?
I've got a thought here and related to something I was going to bring up earlier before I had to jump. Um, in the way that LBJ sort of seems to view power is that it's like something you accumulate like slowly over time, and then you have to like wait for some circumstance or some precipitating moment to like choose to use it. So even if like the playbooks are written, like it is still the chaos of life, like where these things like get enacted, right? So like right at the end of this section that we're reading, um so is it Buchanan? I forget whoever the representative is in his district who dies of a heart attack, right? Like if that doesn't happen, like I'm not sure LBJ ever even becomes president, right? So yes, there are playbooks, but like the ways that it comes out into the world are, I think, are just totally unpredictable.
Yeah, I think in that discussion in the book, LBJ recognizes that opportunity of Buchanan dying immediately. And in fact, he had a visitor from Kansas or someone who had come to see the youth organization uh, process or something in Texas, and LBJ just dropped him immediately and said, "Well, you got to go back to Kansas. The world has changed," uh, and he moved on to do whatever he needed to what we're going to find out next time.
Should we pick up Ladybird since we get to meet her finally?
I was shocked at LBJ's cruelty to her. I know that uh, women were treated even more harshly then than they are sometimes are today. But and again, it was his expectations of how she should perform. And he had similar expectations for his minions in his cult, so to speak. Uh, but to that, for LBJ, I mean, for Ladybird, were added how she comported herself and how she dressed and how she cooked, and just the entire scope of her life uh, was something that he regarded as something that was on display for his benefit with other people. I mean, I don't know. They don't really. There's not really much discussion of their private life uh, when they weren't entertaining someone, um, but he seemed to have such strong expectations about how she should cook for visitors and how she should be dressed for visitors. Uh, Again, the trappings of power and the appearance of power is as important as the actual power.
Yeah, and on that point David's raising, I thought it kind of really like you see the through line back to the earlier sections with how he was sometimes as a child, and then at college as well, of kind of this, demanding, abusive behavior of people. That's just continued through. I mean, even we have the great anecdote here of people having to take notes in his office while he's, relieving himself on the toilet, which is, I mean, I'd heard about, I think, in relation to the White House, but I guess it started even then. So, it's I mean, he's pretty monstrous in a way, in the way he treats people on a kind of personal level.
It kept making me think about like that, that plane shot with like all the early Trump administration people and RFK eating the hamburgers, like you just know like that guy does not want to be eating McDonald's hamburgers, but there's some little seemingly frivolous demonstration that is about like, are you going to bend the knee if you join up?
Yeah, well, I was thinking of just a few months ago, there was that the forcing everyone to buy the Florsheim shoes that were a few sizes too large, and they all had to be stomping around in like clown shoes through the White House all day long, hurting their feet. But reminded me of that.
John, yeah.
Um, I guess I was going back to LBJ. Another thing that I guess maybe actually I wish there was a little more detail on on Ladybird, because like it kind of sets up her and then as like a person, and like what she wants, and then like we get to LBJ, he proposes and he gets her to marry him, and then she just submits, and it's like how did he know, right? I didn't know. Like reading the summary, I didn't know that she was just gonna like put up with that. But somehow, like I don't know. Again, back to his cult leader sense, he sort of like figured out here's the person. She is gonna put up with my crap, and like she has the connections that I need, which do come in very instrumental in the very next chapter after this section. So I don't know. I just how did he know?
God, that's so astute. Yeah, John.
Yeah, same thing as JR. Again, it's like, how did he know? And then, they end the chapter on Ladybird with, after all the abuse that she takes and will continue to take, and, she's the perfect hostess, and she's the thing that makes him, in this case, they're talking about Rayburn and how she helped make Rayburn comfortable in the home. But I know this will be even not having read ahead, I'm sure this will keep happening. So, yeah, it was a short chapter about Ladybird, and obviously Caro couldn't get in LBJ's head about how he decided or what intuition he used, but he certainly made the right call. I hope that I look forward to reading more about her as this goes on. And then Paul beat me to the punch. I'm tracking the vulgarity. I was sad that Jumbo didn't show up, but we did get the come take notes while I'm defecating. And I'm sad to think that won't be the last time that comes up. But I did get to check the vulgarity box in this chapter. So we'll see what happens next time. Thanks.
Massimo.
Great. No, on Ladybird, there was interesting. I went to the back of the book on the a note on sources. It's only a couple pages, and it was interesting. You can kind of Caro talks about who he interviews and so forth, and he talks about Ladybird in a little paragraph, and it seems like um, she didn't know a lot, or I think during his interviews they were after the first volume, so it sounds like we're going to get a lot more from what she says, because he did like 9 interviews with her. Um, so that's just a little tidbit. But that note on sources is actually kind of useful to kind of see. It helps me understand a little bit more about the validity of certain individuals and how much you can kind of trust what Caro is writing about them, or what they're saying in that regard.
Since we're on that little cul-de-sac for a second, is there anything that you've noticed or that you think is useful about those notes that comes to mind that we're going to go looking to pay attention to?
I mean, it's fascinating certain aspects like of how, I mean, most so in Caro's asked like how he goes to find, is it Mr. Whiteside? He like found him in a random mobile home park in Florida, and just like it's crazy, and like maybe kind of to Paul's point of like just happenstance of how things happen, not only in LBJ's life, but it sounds like from Caro's life too, of just trying to spend years on this one volume, and like how yeah, he just like meets him a couple hours before he arrives, and he meets another person just at the airport, random. Like it's he obviously does a really good, like he's very detailed in trying to find these individuals and getting these sources. But it's kind of cool, yeah, just to kind of see what he's doing, and then yeah, and then trying to relate to like which sources are a little bit more of a direct source than others, and others are hearsay.
That's so beautiful. My heart is exploding with like archival historical love. Um, so how did you know about Lady Bird is like a great also like we get these little pops with her too of that loneliness trope that comes up across a few characters, right? Sam Rayburn, like you just get this recurrent. Is that Caro intervening and giving us a theory? Is that a little, does he see something alongside LBJ as a motivating factor in human beings about why they'll sign up for cultish bullshit? Like what are all the ways that perhaps loneliness is or is not working here? And does it feel like a fair construct as an explanation causally? David, you're muted. So,
Sorry, I'll get there in a minute. Um, I mean, that was well known about Rayburn during his career that he was uh, a very isolated person, and you know wanted the company of others, but wasn't never really got in a position to have that happen. I guess partly due to his own personality. Uh, but yeah, LBJ seemed to have a knack for being more than just a person to a lot of people. You know, and filling a void, identifying a void, and then and finding a way to fill it. Because he certainly seemed very adept at uh, finding the right roles for different individuals uh, that suited their individual types of neediness or loneliness uh, that would make them loyal to his purposes. And also, I think maybe it sounds cynical, but he gave them something that maybe improved their lives a bit. So he was a crafty opportunist, but he was bringing people forward as well.
Amy, do you want to say anything else about the mothers, the motherless children, as Lucinda Williams puts it?
It's just like mild, moderate correlation. It's based on what Cairo decides to put in the book, right, about Lady Bird. But the way that he sort of talks about Lady Bird, this is a woman who really was into culture, was really into reading, had a very attunement to beauty, left home and was also occasionally very homesick, had a sort of like a sort of loose similarity to LBJ's own mother. And I was just in the back of my mind, without full evidence, of course, wondering whether LBJ sort of recognized a bit of that in her, like in that sort of parallelism there. So, in sort of your discussion about this conception of loneliness and recognizing it in other people.
He uses one line, like maybe the only sentence so far I've at least clocked, it could be more than that he uses basically verbatim the same way twice in this section about how like the farming is hard work, but the loneliness will kill you, that's the real rub about it. And so that was the one moment where I was like, okay, he repeated it twice. It could just totally be an editing mistake, they happen. But it was like that little turn where you're like, right, there's a whole pool of people who have the raw human talents and capacities to put in these like 12-hour days. But there's hunger, and then there's this other thing also about the conditions of being out there and like both somehow need to be fed or responded to. That there's this self-report of the lonely farmer. I don't know. So I wanted to try to twist that one more layer then and just note. I'm sorry, unless Amy, I'm cutting you off. Your face looks like maybe there's a thought that I don't want to miss. Okay.
The only thing I was just going to add was that I think I do think Cairo's on a hunch. Like his hunch is directionally correct. That LBJ exhibits, just because he's such an odd individual, there's so few people that is similar or parallel to the way LBJ moves and thinks through his life. And in its own way, that creates a kind of loneliness all right, like it's you people bond by having some similar dispositions, similar overlay of life. And LBJ is just so frantic, so hungry to be someone in ways that his old country boy life never was like it didn't mirror that. And so I could conceivably see how loneliness was such a core aspect of his soul's being, and just the instant recognition when he sees it in others too.
Yeah, Massimo.
No, on to what Amy's saying. It's interesting. I think one of the most non-lonely individuals in this section is Congressman is it Clyburn? Right? The playboy, rich. Sounds like he's having a great time all the time. He's and I just interesting. I just was wondering like how LBJ must have felt. Like totally thought this is how he was going to become a congressman, was planting that seed with the ambassador to Mexico. Like I was like, oh, it's like Mexico City is his favorite place. He's totally ready for it, and it sounds like most likely LBJ kind of started that rumor around, and then and just gets shot down. And I mean that's all we hear, but it's I can only imagine what's going on in LBJ's lonely mind after failing in that effort to try and take down a very non-lonely individual in that sense.
Um, I wonder like with the loneliness piece, like so yeah, I guess there's that sidetrack, right, where the congressman is sort of the playboy because he's living off of a long fortune and he doesn't want to continue to be a business guy. So he's enjoying the fruits of the family, the King Ranch family, right? No, the Claiborne family's reputation. So there is a way to have a good life, but it's like it's not the side of the builders here. And so I wondered, just to kind of try to stitch these two back together, about this one other little bit that might be a Caro hunch, might be a way to start moving us towards tying these together, but it's that little strip at the end of using the resources of the youth who like come together and now work hard hours, but also have a team and a family structure of some kind to be with one another around in their early years. Um, and getting them roles in colleges, like being able to kind of pay for keeping people in school in their early years, and then simultaneously the first building of that little strip of park, like a third place kind of bit in the Texas highway landscape. And there's something about ending this section with those early moves that felt like another amplification of the question of loneliness as a motivation alongside politics of the belly, and starting to think about strategies for how you infrastructure against isolation and enemy. I don't know. Try that out. Jamie, do you want to say any more about the schemes that don't work out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of touched on the kind of little Congress thing, and him kind of getting power through that. But it's interesting to see him having so many like plates spinning, and if you just focus on one to kind of stay aloft, it kind of gives him an impression of like absolute genius and omnipotence. And so it's interesting to see the times where he kind of is angling towards something and it doesn't quite work out, and then he has to improvise based off that. So or just go in a completely different way whatsoever. It's like was touched on earlier when his candidate lost for the little Congress, he then basically just said, okay, that's it. I don't really care anymore. I'll go put my time into something else. It's he kind of very good at kind of cutting his losses almost in that respect.
Paul, you want to pick it up with the hunch of the lonely coming from the New Yorkers?
Oh no, it just makes me think a little bit of like that New Yorker cartoon where the three-quarters of the frame are, the city of New York looking west, and then there's the rest of America beyond it. Of kind of like not that I don't have any reason to suspect that like sorry, all these things are like actually documented for the specific people he's mentioning about how isolated, but just the for somebody whose life is basically all in like big Eastern cities, it kind of it seems a little bit like the emphasis is, oh, the terror of being out in this countryside in the middle of the country must be so awful because there's nobody around. It's partially in jest, but I don't know if there's anything to that.
Could we put a little meat on that hunch for a second? Like, because I think you're onto something, but I could be wrong too. But I'm suspicious of a couple pieces. The first being that most of the kind of sociology that's written in the 20th century and shaping what counts as a good question is coming from worries about the city and industrialization and anomie, right? And so the working vocabulary of trying to explain like the plight of, the modern human it's really a city-bound sociology. It's not a rural sociology. And so it's worth asking, what are the terms of training or the habits of mind that make the world look quite different if you go from the biggest city to any other place, really? The other part that I just would want to flag there is that we know he did that Moses Power Broker book, and so he's thinking a lot about the kinds of infrastructures that the New Deal makes available to build third spaces for New Yorkers. And that is a kind of heyday of New York's, ascendance, and something we still champion as what makes the city special. So watching him make that little move to figuring out how that little bit of park got built and why building parks is a good way to build power certainly made me think like, yeah, this guy's thinking like a New Yorker from the machinery of New York politics, even in reading this landscape in Texas. I could be wrong, but it does smell like that kind of attention.
I think the idea of those roadside parks would be such an innovation in a place like rural Texas. I think for that kind of rural setting, to be in agriculture, you have to have a lot of land with a few houses dotted here and there, so people were not near one another. A few of them had cars. My grandfather, my father's father, was a sharecropper in East Texas, and my father was born in 1923, so he's a little bit older than what we're talking about in the book right now. But when my father graduated high school, he signed up with the CCC in the sort of closing days before the war, and put in railroad tracks from New Mexico to California, because he knew that whatever he had to do there, it wouldn't be as hard as what his father would have had him do around their sharecropping operation. And my father ended up on the West Coast, and Pearl Harbor happened, and he joined the military. So I don't know if that's an example of loneliness or just sort of eagerness to get away and do something else, because what you're dealing with day to day in an agricultural setting in a place like Texas, it's pretty onerous. I don't really have a point to make with that, but just those things ring a bell for me from a family perspective.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Both my grandfathers were rural Texas people and both served in World War II. At least part of what the excitement was of being a young person was getting all the way out to California, and seeing a little bit of the world. Anything was better than, your couple hundred people, small town where you didn't know that anything would ever be different,
Mm-hmm.
So there's something there, but also, it's worth thinking about whether or not the analytic terms and categories are being borrowed from an industrial urban setting through which to think about humans, and maybe we haven't built up the rural vocabulary with the right terms to capture some of that stuff. I don't know. All right, so now we take the arc towards next time, right? And what we might want to pull into the mode of reaping, and finally he gets into campaigning. Is there anything that we would want to kind of keep paying attention to that we're excited to see develop so that we can kind of track that for each other? Like I've heard
One thing that struck me that may be relevant, we often think about the New Deal and all of that as kind of being a change in the way governments approach economics and whatnot. But it struck me that in the discussion of Sam Rayburn's career, that one of the first things that happened after FDR came to power was passing these various railroad and acts that broke the power of those large combines. And they weren't really economic in the sense of fiscal policy, but they were changing the terms of market power in the economy in fundamental ways. And this is all long before Keynes and any of those ideas uh, about sort of grand macro schemes, but just changing the terms of trade, so to speak, in terms of economic power in the country drove the early stages of the New Deal, uh, and put the federal government and state governments as well, and in some cases, uh, in greater positions of power in terms of deciding how markets operate. Because I think a lot of the stories we saw in the readings for this time are about railroads and large combines being able to have their way with rural communities economically and in terms of infrastructure and jobs and whatnot.
Other bits like that?
Well, I think this was kind of what you were saying, David, but maybe slightly related is like with the Rayburn example, you see the New Deal as kind of the culmination of decades and decades of certain political currents
Right.
that people have been working
Right.
towards, rather than a completely new innovation or something. And so I guess what would
Yes.
be interesting going forward then is like what's a parallel with LBJ and kind of what comes to fruition at points later in his career that maybe started early with him or even earlier with other people as well.
Right. Yeah, I think it's creating new forms of federal power. It sounds like a lot of prior federal power had to do with sleaziness and corruption rather than institutional structures. And what's being created as LBJ comes into the national legislative world are the creations of these new organizations and agencies that exercise power directly.
Yeah, I'm interested in like the same thing. And so Anna's running like her economic series on Interintellect right now, and Keynes is up next. So I've been reading a biography of Keynes as well, and that overlaps with this section like so well. And yeah, the federalizing power. But I'm interested in like the industrialization of America that we're gonna see coming up here. I'm interested to see how, because I know in the beginning of the book we get teased that LBJ's like one of the big things he does is the electrification of rural America. So I'm interested to see how that, not only like brings electricity, but also like is part of this greater shift of America from like a big agricultural country to a more industrial country as we like lead up to World War II.
Other bits like that?
Sorry, I just wanted something on what Marcus said that was interesting to me is like I always thought of kind of the federal investment into the Sun Belt as, really World War II and then kind of post-war with the aerospace and defense programs, and you get the huge suburban rush out to Texas, out to California. But it's interesting that, like, just from reading this, how much political power Texas already had nationally, like decades before that happens, and maybe as the predicate for kind of putting that all into place. Coming up in the next, 10, 20 years after this point.
I'm curious to kind of track Lady Bird a little more. There's a new book out that's quite good about her work on the campaigns later, like in the 60s. And by then she's like, she's like a baller. I don't know what happened to her. She had a glow up of some kind, and is running like major press operations. She clearly owns papers. Like she's got a whole like kind of cadre of folks on trains going with her everywhere. So something happens in her relationship to power. Yeah, that's really a kind of a Pygmalion story or something, but like of a finishing school girl. I don't know. So I'm very curious how that happens. And just personally, I grew up in that area. And so much of the regional pride is in the way that Lady Bird Johnson beautified the highways. That was really her thing, was beautification, and flowers. And so I'm just curious how beauty gets mixed in with these questions of politics of the belly, infrastructure, market making, the state, because it really is kind of a lasting legacy. And I wonder how he becomes receptive to that style of movement, and makes use of it.
If I recall correctly, some of it had to do with a network of radio stations that her family owned, and that it was more convenient politically that they be in her name rather than LBJ's. I don't know how much active involvement he had in it, but just in terms of economic betterment, it was better if it was on her side than on his.
All right. Well, this has been, oh, Amy sorry. I'm like a very face expression reader. So if it looks like someone wants to say this something, I'm always very like, "Oh, I don't want to miss it." But if I'm overreading your face, my apologies. I
The
just,
only minor thing I was like I was maybe like, so maybe two things. One was that I didn't get to talk about throughout our time here, was like I was a little struck by how he was almost taken off the political track by becoming a lobbyist instead. And it was kind of like the moment when I was like, well, Hitler could have been an artist kind of feeling. And then all this would have never happened. This is one thing I was going to throw out there. It's just like, oh, I wonder whether there were more forks within in the later chapters that would sort of set him to make firm choices about committing to being a president, or at least the track towards that road. And the second thing I would be very curious to see as well is that just like I don't have a very strong political orientation, but I was mildly struck by the tax tariff, like the discussion about Hoover's laissez-faire relationship with farmers, and how FDR came in and changed all that. And I was just mildly being like, oh, I wonder if that has any similarities to the blue collar, like the way that our last 2 decades was the blue collar workers as like globalization sort of happened, whether there was any parallel. And I'd love to see how LBJ keeps sort of being opportunistic about ways in which he can maneuver programs to his own benefit for his district and whatnot. So
yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk about Hoover and the economy, Massimo. Yeah.
No, I probably will reread a little bit of the introduction, because I think now it's going to be a little bit more relevant when it comes to, finding the solution to the dam issue. And then I'm interested to see kind of his rise to fortune in monetary terms, right? I think Caro says that he comes into the Oval Office as the richest man at that time, or at least the richest president at that time. So just to kind of, he's still dirt poor, at least in the sense of, relatively, but just to see how the, I don't know, how the manipulations start, how the contracts start, how he gets that, is it the radio station, I believe, in that aspect. So that's what I'm interested in. And then that little bit, we talked a little bit about driving his cars, and that little thing about him driving super fast, but then checking all the wheels and tires and making sure that none of them are loose. Personally, like, how does that relate to him, in the campaign? And moving forward, those details seem to really matter for him. And then he can go 100 miles an hour without a care in the world. Yeah.
That's a banger, Max. What a great advice. Drive fast, but check the tires. So until next time. Awesome. Well, I'm making a little list of stuff as we go, that in case we want like a kind of bibliography at the end, or it's throughout, sidebars and resources about different stuff, and we'll, flesh it out if we want it. But this is just such a, yeah, such a privilege and an honor to get to read together. Thanks for showing up for this. It's so fun. We'll see you in a month. Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Be well. Have a great
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.